This is Boston Lanka News, bringing you news, views and entertainment from Boston and USA. I'm Bayoni Dimel. Dr. P. Saravanamuttu, Executive Director, Center for Policy Alternatives, was also the founder board member of the Sri Lanka chapter of Transparency International. In 2010, he was awarded the inaugural Citizens' Peace Award by the National Peace Council of Sri Lanka. Dr. Saravanamuttu received a BSc Econ Honours degree and PhD in International Relations from the London School of Economics and Politics Science University of London in 1979 and 1986, respectively. Dr. Saravanamuttu joins from Colombo to share his views on post-Geneva issues. Dr. Saravanamuttu, the resolution that was passed at the UN Human Rights Sessions was interpreted by External Minister G.L. Peiris more as a victory for Sri Lanka. Your comments?
Well, the rationale that the Minister G.L. Peiris used for saying it's a victory for Sri Lanka was on the basis that out of the 47 voting members of the Council, 23 voted for the resolution, 12 abstained, 12 voted against. So now the foreign minister has added the abstentions and the votes against to say that that constitutes a majority. Now, I think what needs to be pointed out to him is very simply this, that all the members of the Human Rights Council know that a resolution is carried by a simple majority. On that basis, the rationale is that an abstention in effect facilitates the passage of a resolution rather than impedes it. What abstention does is not to give a resolution a larger majority. So I think, with all due respect, that the minister's arithmetic and logic is rather cockeyed at the end of the day. I think the rationale is also underpinned by a need to suggest that Sri Lankan foreign policy is not in the parlous state that it is at the present moment, because a number of key countries from the global south did not vote with the government of Sri Lanka in Geneva, despite the fact that the government of Sri Lanka lobbied them fairly intensely throughout the year.
Sri Lankan government reacted in a very aggressive manner to the resolution. Government detained some human rights activists, banned some Tamil diaspora groups, and even conducted some military operations in North, looking for some individuals who government think trying to resurrect LTT. Your response?
Well, my response to it is this. I think the actions of the government of Sri Lanka are largely determined by a number of factors and with a number of objectives in mind. I think the first one is to stop the flow of information from the ground in the peninsula and in the Vanni, because that information is absolutely critical in terms of continuing violations, absolutely critical to the counter-narrative that civil society can mount to the propaganda that the government puts out. They want to stamp out that flow of information with regard to past and ongoing violations, both at a national level as well as at an international level. What you've got, in effect, is a sealing off of the peninsula and the Vanni in terms of information flow. The banning of these organizations, I think, also is to delegitimize an international investigation, because these organizations may well want to engage with that international investigation. We want to brand them all as terrorists, as tigers, as secessionists, and whatever. Also, I think the targeting of the diaspora is also aimed at preventing the flow of funds to the Tamil National Alliance, parliamentarians and politicians who rely to a large extent on those funds to engage in development work in the peninsula and in the valley. In addition to that, I think at the end of the day, the political objective for the Rajapaksa regime is to claim that there is a revitalized LTTE and only they can defend the country against that revitalized LTTE, defeat it, defeat terrorism in the way that terrorism was defeated in 2009. So there are a number of political objectives, I think, which are being served by these arrests and detentions, as well as by the bannings.
If you have a scorecard for Sri Lankan foreign ministers of recent past, how would you evaluate the performance of present external minister G.L. Pires?
Well, with all due respect to the minister, I would rank him very, very low, insofar as Sri Lankan foreign policy over the years and Sri Lankan diplomats over the years have had tremendous international recognition. They have been the envy of a number of diplomats in the global north as well as in the global south. I mean, to give you a single example, my understanding is that the Sri Lankan mission, for example, in Washington, D.C., arguably the most important and powerful capital in the world, has only one career foreign service official working there. The government of Sri Lanka pays PR firms to write speeches for the ambassador, to get appointments, to meet with senators, legislators, and others. This is surely very demoralizing and indeed very demeaning to the diplomatic service of Sri Lanka, the once proud diplomatic service of Sri Lanka, and indeed to Sri Lanka as the country.
Contact Colombo Express for all your shipping needs. Colombo Express.
What are the most common misconceptions or misinformation people have about the UN resolution that was passed and its aftermath?
Well, I think that whilst the sessions were going on in Geneva, as you know, we had two provincial council elections going on in Sri Lanka for the western province, in which the capital city Colombo is located, and for the southern province, the home turf, as it were, of the president. In this campaign, there was a lot of rhetoric, and from the president himself, saying that the whole purpose of this resolution was regime change, and even worse, that the objective was to take him to the electric chair. Now, the first clarification, of course, is that at the international level, there is no electric chair, and furthermore, a resolution of the Human Rights Council of the United Nations is not mandatory and cannot take anyone to in any electric chair or anything like that. The only mandatory resolutions from the United Nations, as we know, is from the Security Council. Then there was also the suggestion that sanctions were going to be imposed on Sri Lanka. That too is not something you can do through a resolution in the United Nations Human Rights Council. So there were a number of misconceptions like that which were intended, I think, to scare people into voting for a regime that has defined itself in terms of the only one with the proven record of defeating LTT terrorism.
In your view, what could be the consequences of this resolution that was passed? Government is determined not to cooperate with any international investigation.
Well, I think what will happen is that the investigation will simply go ahead on the basis of evidence and testimonies and information that is already outside of Sri Lanka. It may well be the case that there might be some who may dare, if I might use the word, to provide information and testimony to the investigation from within Sri Lanka, but it will largely be based on information outside. Now, it will be the first investigation and report arising from that investigation in a multilateral forum. It will be the report of an international investigation spearheaded by the United Nations Human Rights Council. And in that respect, pressure can mount. On the basis of that investigation report, single countries can take decisions in respect of their relationship with Sri Lanka. So it's not going to be something that's going to have some sort of immediate, urgent, decisive impact per se. Rather, it is going to be one in which the pressure for accountability will be built up through that resolution and the report that follows.
Tell us how you think the Sri Lankan government should respond to the resolutions and the demands of the international community for accountability.
You see, everything that has been happening since 2009, the trajectory of events and developments suggests to us that we are post-war and now probably going back to war in terms of the situation on the ground in the peninsula and in the Vanni, as opposed to post-conflict. And I define post-conflict in terms of the sources of conflict not being sustained and certainly not being reproduced. If you look at the last 5 years, we've had institutionalized militarization in the north and east and in the rest of the country. You had a near breakdown of the rule of law, the farcical impeachment of the Chief Justice. And we've opened up a new front in respect of religious intolerance, with attacks on Christian places of worship, Muslim places of worship, and businesses. All of that must stop. As the international community has pointed out, there is a Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission report, a commission established by the President of Sri Lanka. Its recommendations should be expeditiously implemented. It falls short in respect of accountability. Steps should be taken with regard to that. There are egregious cases of violations happening before the last 2 years of the war. The Trincomalee Five, the kids who were killed in cold blood on the beach, the 17 humanitarian workers in Muthu. What has happened with regard to that? So many investigations, we don't hear the results of the investigations. There seems to be a cancer of impunity. In addition to that, and very importantly too, the government is on record at the very highest echelons of it, saying that military victory is not the end of the story. There are political steps that need to be taken, including a political settlement. This has been stalemated, stymied by them over the last 5 years. There is a 13th Amendment to the Constitution of Sri Lanka setting up provincial councils, for example. This is part of the constitution of the country. It's not being implemented in full. So these are a number of things that the government can do. Witness and victim protection legislation, right to information legislation, independent oversight commissions in respect of the police, the public service, human rights, and we can go on like that. But really, there needs to be a much more sincere and substantive commitment on the part of the government to effect meaningful reconciliation and to bring this conflict to an end.
There are lots of accusations against NGOs. According to many in the ruling coalition, some NGOs get a lot of money from Western countries and also have agendas according to the Western interests. Your response?
Well, a number of things in response to that. In Sri Lanka, there isn't a tradition, a history, or a record of local funds being given for human rights work or governance work. That's one. Secondly, I challenge these accusers to come up with examples of instances where funders, as in foreign governments, have paid organizations money to do X, Y, and Z. Political parties also get money from foreign sources as well. It's an easy accusation to make. It should be borne out with facts, and that we have yet to see.
You have been critical of Jayantha Dhanapala, who serves on the board of Dialogue, when according to you, Dialogue blocks the Colombo Telegraph. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, what I did say, and that I think is the last Colombo Telegraph report, given the available evidence that has been put out, and by Colombo Telegraph, not being contradicted by anyone, Dialogue appears to be blocking Colombo Telegraph. And the point that I made was very simply that, given the evidence and information out in the public realm at the present moment, being a director of Dialogue, which blocks Colombo Telegraph, and being a member of the Friday Forum, which champions freedom of expression, of speech, and good governance, appears to me to be incompatible positions. And therefore, one faced with that dilemma has to choose. And that's very simply the point that I am making. There are processes and procedures by which this choice has to be made. But I think with the evidence out there, it is a fair question to pose as to whether or not these two positions are incompatible and as to whether a choice should be made. And that's what I have done, is to pose that question when asked by Colombo Telegraph with regard to this. I think 3 weeks ago, Colombo Telegraph also asked me this question, and I said that as far as I know, that Ambassador Dhanapala would observe and make a decision within the best interests of good governance.
That concludes our news edition. We meet you again with another news edition of News, Views and Entertainment from Boston and USA. Till then, goodbye.